Hello, and welcome to my third video in the series on running Frog God games, The Blight. In the previous videos, I talked a little bit about the purpose of all this, and in the last video, I went over the villains of the story. What I want to talk about now are the NPCs. The various characters that are in the adventure path that I think are significant and important, and ones that I think were maybe not as emphasized that I think could be more important. Just to sort of stress the things I'm talking about in these videos, this is just my thoughts, my approach. It's sort of reflective of my style and how I like my games to feel when I run them. So by no means does this need to be sort of how you do things. But just wanted to give you my thoughts, my ideas on what I thought was important and how I ran the game. Now, one of the things that I wanted to keep in mind as I was sort of going through NPCs in this AP was sort of the idea that I've heard and read elsewhere that it can be really useful and helpful to introduce NPCs early. People who are going to be important later on, have the PCs be able to interact with them sooner in order to, sort of develop those relationships and to increase their, significance and also their believability. Why are the PCs going to follow along with someone they just met told them? So it's just something I tried to keep in my mind as I was sort of putting things together and making modifications to the adventure path. So the first important NPC that your player characters are going to meet is Eleanor Shank. Now, she is a member of the Thieves Guild, and she is the person who actually saves their life at the very beginning. When they start the adventure path, they're imprisoned on this prison ship, and she's the one who releases them. So the way it's written in the book is, her sponsor, mentor, Benedict Morrill. I think they have it like, some seer, someone he knows, had a vision that the PCs were going to be important, and so he asked Eleanor to save them. I'll be honest, that felt really contrived to me. I just didn't like it. So I threw that right out. So there's a number of ways you can go about having Eleanor save them, or motivations she could have for saving them. One is just plain dumb luck. She needed some people who were disposable, and so she found some people on this prison ship that she had access to. And so, that's how the PCs get released. So it could be something as simple as that, believable, and then she ultimately ends up becoming a friend of theirs. The way I ended up doing it was, a couple of my player characters had a sort of a shared backstory where one of the players' fathers was a con man who died. I thought it'd be interesting to have, the con man having conned his son and trainee and disappeared himself. And he ultimately was a high-ranking member of the guild. And so, when he heard that his son and former trainee were imprisoned, he got one of his low-ranking guild members to go spring them from prison. Completely in secret. He didn't want to sort of give up, expose the con. So, Eleanor never told them why she saved them, just that she needed somebody. But it would actually turned out to be one of the characters' fathers who orchestrated the whole thing. So that was how I did it. Needless to say, though, this is the NPC's first opportunity to meet her, and she's going to play sort of a pivotal role going forward. I had her be a resource for my players. One of the things that they wanted to do once they got to the city was start finding survivors from Wiccan. People, they could, they wanted to be able to find their family members, and so they needed contacts in the city to be able to do this. And Eleanor was that person for them. When they were looking for their family, she was the one who was doing some of the work in the background. which made it convenient for me to be able to introduce side quests along the way for the players to be able to look for their lost people. So every once in a while I could have Eleanor pop up and be like, okay, I've been looking into this thing for you, and I heard some of your family members are here. You might want to look into that. So she was a very convenient NPC for giving the players some side quests that weren't part of the AP. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the family members in a moment. So she's really important. The next, somewhat important NPC is Long Lucy. She is the leader of the Cirque Macabre, who the players will meet in the first adventure. And she's one of the first, besides Eleanor, one of the first good people the players meet in this very, very dark, very, very bleak city. So she ends up being, I think, a really important NPC, along with many of the other members of the circus. My players have stayed in contact with the circus throughout the adventure. They've befriended many of the circus members. And I think this is important, especially, later on, one of the NPCs from the circus, Scarred Samuel, gets arrested. And it's sort of the job of the NPCs to sort of clear his name. That doesn't really happen, or at least it won't have any meaning unless the players feel connected to the circus. And so I really made it a point of making the circus important as just friends of the players and the player characters. So definitely something I think worth, putting some energy into. Now, one of the things that's sort of brewing in the background of the adventure is the brewing revolution. Within Toil Town are the revolutionaries and the anarchists who are starting to stir stuff up. I really sort of emphasize this. I brought stuff up that was happening in the city. One of the things the AP introduces is the Raven, which is this small little pamphlet periodical that's being published by the revolutionaries. And it's usually some sort of commentary on something that's going on in the city or things that the revolutionaries have done. There were a couple sample ones in the book. I took that and I ran with it. And I've created my own issues of the Raven that were constantly dropping. And so, whenever there was stuff about the revolution I wanted the players to hear about, it was in the latest copy of the Raven. And then every once in a while they would see stuff as they were traveling the city, executions and, sort of some of the abuses by the guard, the city watch and things like that. And so they had a chance to sort of see some of that firsthand. But I really wanted the revolutionaries to play a role. And as the AP has developed, I'm thinking they're going to play a prominent role in my Act 2 of this, which is not part of the AP. I feel like once they deal with sort of the story of the beautiful, I think the revolution is really going to pop to the forefront. And so the revolutionaries are going to be really important. And so to that effect, some of the NPCs that don't show up until much later could benefit from showing up earlier. One of them is Sister Anna Campion. She is a fixture within the Render little parish of Toil Town. One of my players and his characters is a cleric, and he decided to set up a clinic in Toil Town for helping people. And so when he did that, I had him meet that NPC a lot earlier. Consequently, they're actually now dating. So when you get to chapter 8 and they're having to hunt down Threnody, one of the NPCs who's supposed to help the PCs is Sister Anna. And so when they were sort of looking for information on how to find this thing, my one NPC who knows her was like, oh, why don't we go talk to Sister Anna Campion? Maybe she might be able to help us. And, so then they don't have to go through this runaround of, sort of proving to her that, that they're worth talking to, and things like that. So, they already knew her. She was already part of their life. So it made for a very seamless sort of transition in that adventure for them to go to her. Another NPC that pops up is Jacob Moyle, and he is one of the important members of the Renders, and the Renders are one of the revolutionary groups. I didn't introduce him until that adventure, but I think he's someone you could easily introduce sooner and make more important, depending on some of the choices your players make. My players didn't make a choice to be more involved in the revolution, so I didn't see a reason to bring him in. But maybe as you're sort of showing that there's this revolution brewing in the background, maybe some of your players might want to, look into that a little bit more. Maybe they hate how the city is and want to be part of the revolution. And so Jacob Moyle would be a great NPC for them to meet early on if they wanted to sort of engage with that aspect of the city. Another important, I don't know if we would call it an NPC, but it's a group, which is the Guild. One of the things that I think makes the Blight and Casterhage interesting is that it's such a dark and bleak city that the Thieves Guild is, in some ways, can be considered a force of good in the city. They actually oppose the aristocracy here and there. They actually, cause problems for the people in power. They're an ally to the revolutionaries. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there are certainly evil aspects of the Guild, but there are, the Guild is, a lot of times in different city settings, the Guild is a very cohesive organization with a clear leadership structure. In Casterhage, it is such a huge entity. I think they even say in the book that, at any one time, there are 4 or 5 people who could claim to be the Guild Master, because the Guild is so factional and large and somewhat, it's not one cohesive entity. And so that means there's a lot you can do with it in terms of, if you want to do something specifically with the Guild, with sort of there being like a factional sort of conflict. But also, there can be aspects of the Guild that are really into trying to help the city. And I feel like Eleanor Shank is one of those people, and she's part of one of those factions. Specifically, they say she's a rat catcher. And the rat catchers are a faction of the Guild who oppose the were-rat family from Festival. So the Guild plays a large role in so many aspects of the city. And I think playing and, building that up, utilizing that can be really helpful and just interesting. So they're worth, thinking about how you might want to work into the system, into your game. Another important NPC, and this is one where I made some modifications. Benedict Morrill. He is from the capital. He is specifically associated with Princess, I think it's Rebecca of Morny. So one of the royals. She is probably one of the good royals. She actually opposes much of her family and some of the craziness that's going on in her family. And she has the secret knights of the capital, who are actually a force of good within the city. And Benedict Morrill is the leader of those knights. So the way it's written in the book is he gets involved with the PCs because of some vision somebody had. I thought that was dumb. It felt contrived to me, so I immediately got rid of that. But the fact that he's connected with Eleanor Shank, I thought was interesting. Basically, it was, he met her, maybe she tried stealing from him, picking his pocket, saw some potential in her, and so decided to sponsor her. Got her into a school, got her, so she got an education, and they've been close ever since, almost like a father-daughter kind of relationship. But because she was low caste, he was very much in her background, not really an active participant in her day-to-day life. He was more in the shadows. So the way I decided to have it is like, they've maintained a relationship all these years. They've been close. And so, over the course of the adventure, she's getting together with him for lunches or dinners or whatever it is they do. And she's talking about, I met these interesting new people and they're involved in this, all this stuff. And so, she starts talking to Benedict Morrill about the PCs and what they're involved in. And eventually he starts to get really interested. Some of the things they're involved in are starting to merge with things that he's been hearing about. He's heard about this angel that seems to be influential in the city, and he thinks she's no good. He thinks that the beautiful is another aspect of the city's evil that's trying to hoodwink the players, people, whatever the case may be. And so eventually, as things start to develop, he asks Eleanor to meet the PCs. Since they seem to be so deeply involved with this, maybe they can help. So, later on in the AP, when he finally meets them, it's not because of some strange vision. It's because, he's heard about the PCs through Eleanor. You could always do it another way, but I find that to be more interesting and more just believable than some wacky vision someone had. And, like I said, I didn't like that. So, he ends up becoming an important NPC in that respect. And he's the one who's going to get the PCs into the capital for the first time. He's the one that's going to give them information about the beautiful and Father Cromwell being out on the island of Ossuary. So, he is an important NPC. And I think his relationship with Eleanor is important because why are the PCs going to follow some advice or directions from this person from the capital, and all they know of the capital at this point is that it's bad. It's filled with the aristocracy who are just terrible people. So why are they going to follow this guy's advice and suggestions unless there's some sort of personal connection? And that connection is Eleanor Shank, which is why I think she's such in some ways, a pivotal NPC in the path. So thoughts I've had about him going forward. So he wants the PCs to eliminate the beautiful. Like I said, he thinks that she is up to no good and should be eliminated. So that's going to potentially create some conflict, especially if you're following my other idea of having the beautiful actually be good, have her actually be an angel trying to do good things. That may not necessarily jive with what you are going to try and, what your PCs might actually be feeling about the beautiful. When you get to the final chapter, Apotheosis, and it's time for you to make the choice whether or not to oppose the beautiful or join with her, Benedict Morrill is going to be encouraging you to take her out. If you choose to support the beautiful, this might actually set up a confrontation between your PCs and Morrill and the Knights of the Capitol. So instead of, running the combats that are in the AP, if the PCs decide to side with the beautiful, you might actually end up throwing out most of that last chapter. And so, you're gonna have to come up with new, conflicts and combats. And one of those may in fact be fighting against Morrill, which to me is very interesting because here's someone who's been an ally, someone who's a friend of Eleanor, who you know and you like because she's been helping you for all along the way. And now here you are having to face them in combat. And you're going to have to make a decision, are you going to fight them? And if you fight them, are you going to kill them? Or are you just going to try and subdue them and allow the beautiful to finish what she's going to do? Because, if you allow the beautiful to do her thing, Morrill, who is an ally, now an opponent, may once again become an ally in this Act 2 of this adventure. At least that's how I'm imagining it, once my players get to that point. While he opposed them there, he wasn't necessarily their enemy. And now that there's this sort of post-apocalyptic thing going on, here in the city, he may once again be like, all right, well, this has happened. What are we going to do about it? So I think he can be a very interesting NPC and can actually be both an ally and an opponent at different points, depending on what choices the PCs make. Now, the final sort of NPC-ish thing I wanted to talk about was the Wiccan survivors. One of the choices I made that was very different from what was written in the AP was I actually have there be a lot of survivors. You know, the way it's written, the Knights Ocularis come into Wiccan and basically kill everybody. They take a few prisoners, the PCs amongst them, but basically wipe out everybody else. I found that to be not as interesting because while revenge can be a great motivator for the PCs, I felt that, you know, trying to rescue survivors would be an even stronger motivator. So I kept many of them alive. There were some that died, and some that died that the PCs witnessed, but many of them did survive. And so it created opportunities for a lot of interesting side quests, you know, as the AP was going along. And the way I did it was like this. And this is going to sound bleak, but that's the Blight. That's Caster Hage for you. All the children were sold to surgeon artists to use in their art and experimentation. Early on in the AP, the players find evidence of one of the children in one of the family's little establishments, and they're able to follow up on that in the second adventure of the AP. Now, as it's written in the AP, if memory serves, that family member is actually already dead. Fine, but I didn't think that was interesting. I actually had her be alive, but changed. The surgeon artist turned her into a golem-like creature. Still sentient, still her, but not her. And so when the PCs, take care of Gray and they find her, now they have to figure out, okay, what do we do with her? And this is where their relationship with the circus came into play. You'll recall from looking at the first adventure that the circus, Cirque Macabre, is basically a collection of, people who didn't fit in anywhere else. So, a rescued golem would actually fit right into, sort of what they do. Matter of fact, at the end of, I think, the first adventure, you actually rescue a golem called Ivy. And she ended up at the circus as well. So, many of the people the PCs rescue actually end up, being taken in by Long Lucy in the circus, which is why I think that NPC sort of group ends up being so important. I had many of the children being sold off, into these situations. So the PCs got to sort of chase that down. The old and the infirm were sold to the Physicians Institute for medical experiments. So the PCs then had to hunt that down. One of my players decided to be a Tengu, one of the Raven folk. And so I actually had his family sold to a famous chef. And so there was this in the city. There's this exclusive club, where they basically are cannibals, and they also serve other sort of rare and probably not globally condoned delicacies. And so at some point, the player found out his family was being served for dinner someplace. And so they then, went and rescued the surviving family members there. And then finally, all the sort of strong and able-bodied family members ended up getting sent to the mines. And so the players would then have an adventure being able to get their family out of there as well. So I thought that was important. And then, of course, one of the things that's written in the AP is that the Knights Ocularis actually kept some of the family, some of the Wiccanites, in their possession as well. And the PCs are able to sort of get them back towards the end. So I did leave that in there as written. So the Wiccanites, I think, can be really important as a motivator for your PCs. And to that effect, there's one Wiccanite in particular that I think is especially important, and that's Father Cromwell. He's sort of at the center of this entire thing. He's the one who hunted down the beautiful. He's the one that rescued her from the Between. When I had the PCs sort of developing their backstories, and I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about that, but all the PCs are from the village of Wiccan. When I was giving them background on Wiccan, I threw in a few NPCs that they would know in the city, one of them being Father Cromwell. And some of the players, brought him into their backstories. And so there was an established connection there between the players and Father Cromwell, and a reason why they would be looking for him, now that everything's kind of gone sideways. So I think making sure the players care about Father Cromwell to some degree, I think, can be important. And so sort of emphasizing him in the sort of the background flavor of Wiccan, especially when they're creating their own backstories, I think can be really important in terms of, giving your characters motivation to want to hunt him down and find him. And maybe they're thinking they have to rescue him. So I think he is finally one of the other big important NPCs in the path that I think making sure you sort of integrate him into how you do things can be really important. So those are important NPCs in a nutshell. I mean, these aren't all the NPCs in the adventure path, but the ones I found to be the most important. I guess an argument can be made that the Grasts, the Were-Rat family from Festival, are important. Depending on how your players deal with them in that first adventure, they can end up being a villain and enemies of the PCs, or in the case of my group, they actually ended up being friends. Friends that they tried to stay away from. They did not trust or really want to have anything to do with the family, but they had something of a friendship with them. More out of like, I'm going to be friends with you so that you're not my enemy sort of friendship, rather than a true friendship. So they ended up not being really important in my campaign. So your mileage may vary depending on how your PCs decide to deal with the family in that first adventure, and moving forward from there. All right, so this concludes my video on NPCs. In my next video, I'm going to talk about religion and the Blight, and why that might be something you'll want to think about and why it might be important. All right, until next time.